Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Mohling. I'm a senior political science major, and I'm happy to welcome all of you to the penultimate episode in our virtual career exploration series called MIDDVantage Careers on Capitol Hill. This series focuses on how the U.S. Congress works, and we will, throughout the series, get to hear from many talented members of the Middlebury community who work on different issues in and around Capitol Hill. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Kelly Hennessy. Kelly graduated in the class of 2015.5 and is now a policy advisor and director of member services on the House Oversight Committee. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So just to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about your career path from graduation to Capitol Hill now?
Yeah, of course. So I graduated in February of 2016. I was a history major and a poli-sci minor, and honestly graduated without a huge idea of exactly what I wanted to do. I really knew what I liked, which was writing. I had worked for a magazine throughout my college career, and I really liked diving deep into new policy ideas, right? And I wanted to travel at that point. So I actually worked for a newspaper out in New Zealand, in Wellington. And then a few months into that, one of my Middlebury friends reached out who was working on the 2016 campaign and convinced me to come back to the States. I thought it would be like a temporary visit that I would work the campaign and then head back out, but have been in DC since. So I moved to Virginia in 2016 and worked for the Virginia Democratic Party. And then after we lost in November, I moved to DC and started working, interning for Congressman Pallone, who is also a mid-grad. I interned into his office for a while until I got a staff assistant position with Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. She represents New York's 12th district, which has a little bit of Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. I was her staff assistant, which means I was the person driving her around, taking her to votes, taking her to evening events, kind of doing whatever anybody in the office needed me to do. And then I moved up within her office to a legislative aid position, handling, LA positions, you handle 15 or so issues over in the House, but I was mostly focused on education, on healthcare, on the environment, and a few other smaller issues. In November 2019, she won the chairmanship for the House Oversight and Reform Committee and decided to move me over to the committee side and start working from there. So now I work with the health policy team. I'm one of the members on that team working on health investigations. And then I'm a director of member services, which is a very weird hill position, but that's where I am now.
That's super interesting. And it's always great to hear students who maybe don't quite have it figured out at graduation, but everyone seems to kind of make their way, somehow ending up at Capitol Hill, which is great for people like maybe myself who don't really know what they're doing either yet. So that's really great background and kind of very interesting to hear about your journey already. So could you give us a bit of overview on what the House Oversight Committee does? Because it's a pretty powerful one.
Yeah, so the House Oversight Committee differs from a lot of the other committees because our principal motive is investigations, right? So we have a very limited legislative jurisdiction, which our legislative jurisdiction covers about the 2 million federal employees that are across the United States, different government agencies like the Census Bureau and Postal Service, basically all general government operations. So that's what we have a policy team that handles that. But most of what our committee does is investigations. So we have the authority to investigate. We're authorized by House Rule 10 to investigate any matter at any time that is within the jurisdiction of the House. So we can jump into other people's jurisdiction. We can kind of do these broad investigations, which is really great because we, can tackle a ton of different issues, which is incredible.
Oh, that's super interesting. So with the breadth of the committee, so in your role as a policy advisor specifically for the health department, how do you kind of help the committee complete its oversight tasks?
Yeah, so the committee kind of breaks up those investigations into different teams, right? So to make sure that we can handle this wide range. The reason we take on investigations are both to hold government officials accountable and also to examine what issues are facing America today and what possible legislation we might need to pursue to fix those issues. So with the health team, we do a lot looking at different like health and human services policies. We look at, right now we're about to do, people can tune in on later this week, our drug pricing hearings that look at the pricing practices of US drug manufacturers. So when you're on that team, you do a lot of, one, just the basic doc review, going through, we ask for certain information from different entities. They send us back millions and millions of documents that we then have to review and decide, what exactly is going on. And then a lot of it is preparing those materials and communicating with our members, the members of Congress that sit on our committee, about what we found, what questions there might still be, what actions they may need to take. And so a lot of it is kind of synthesizing that information. We put out reports, we help members, we'll do hearings, and we help members write the question lines for those hearings to make sure that they understand exactly what information we're trying to dig deeper into. So it's those type of things.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you really serve as an advisor to those members of Congress. And so do you really specifically still work for Congressman Malone, or are you really, you could be used, or your advice could be used by any member of the committee?
Yeah, so the chairwoman is like our boss. She's the head honcho. And so she is definitely, who we communicate with the most. That said, we do talk frequently with all the members of our committee and the rest of the Democratic caucus as a whole, right? So any other member who even doesn't sit on the committee, if they have certain questions about, say, census operations or something going on with the Postal Service in their district, they reach out to the committee and we can talk them through that, help walk them through possible policy ideas. They'll flag stuff for us that they think we should be looking into, that type of thing. So you are available and work for the Democratic caucus as a whole and the House as a whole.
Okay. Oh, very interesting. And so the ability of the committee to do this oversight is broad ranging, like we've said. How exactly does it make it powerful, though? Is it who it oversees or what it oversees, or is it their ability to act on what you might find in these hearings or through your research?
So I think it's a combination. First of all, the committee is one of the chairwoman is one of the committee chairs who does have unilateral subpoena power. Meaning she doesn't need a minority vote or a vote from committee members to be able to subpoena anyone. We try to use that sparingly, and we always try to get buy-in from both sides of the aisle before we do that. But for companies or entities, agencies, whatever, that are not being responsive to congressional requests, we can use that power. So there is that. The broad jurisdiction also makes it so we don't have to, some of the committees, other committees also have oversight subcommittees, but they are limited to their legislative jurisdiction. So they are not able to explore quite as widely as we are. So our ability to kind of respond to whatever crisis pops up gives us a lot more flexibility. We also have around 60 full committee staff members, and in total around 100 staff members that work for the committee. So we also just have immense resources and expertise to dig into those issues.
That's really interesting. So you guys, in a way, act as sort of the research arm of Congress as a whole occasionally, right?
Exactly. So we try to, distill down what we found in our investigations, and our committee will work with other members and with other committees to figure out what the legislative solutions are to that. So it definitely drives the legislative agenda.
Oh, that's really great. So switching gears just a little bit and looking more granularly at your job and kind of how you act within the committee. So how often does the committee meet? Is that, on a set schedule, or when things really pop up? And what does your day-to-day workload consist of? What do you spend the majority of your time doing?
So the committee meets, it kind of depends on the week. So we have full committee hearings, and then we'll also have subcommittee hearings. So the committee has subcommittees that are focused on specific issue areas. So we have an environmental subcommittee, government operations, national security, economic and consumer policy, civil rights and civil liberties, and then at the moment we have a select committee working on the coronavirus response. So those committees each will meet usually at least once a week. Right now we're doing hybrid hearings. So some members will be in person and some members will participate remotely. When we're in session, those committees generally meet once a week. And then the full committee generally has 1 or 2 hearings a week. Usually we shoot for 1 just because it's a pretty big load to pull everything together. But for example, this week we'll have 1 on Wednesday morning. We have another full committee meeting on Thursday morning. So we're doing a double header of hearings. Day to day, it really depends on exactly when the next hearing schedule is coming up, that type of thing. Each team sort of gets called up for their hearing, and you spend a week and a half prepping, because we give members memos describing the issue with some background information for them, so they're prepared for the hearing. We also do a first draft and work with offices on all the question lines you see members ask. So you spend a lot of time thinking through in 5-minute blocks what type of questions will be helpful for this issue, and then a lot of time communicating with all of our member offices, find out what their boss wants to focus on, what they find interesting, how we can work together to make sure it's like a good punchy question line that gets us the information we need. So a lot of time is spent drafting those, writing a lot of memos, a lot of research, that type of thing. The other hat I wear for the committee is member services, which is something each committee generally has. It's a person who sort of acts as like a liaison for the Democratic caucus. So I'm the person who, if your boss really wants their bill to get moved forward, you contact me. I try to run it up the chain, see what we can do, see if it's, if it's ready to be moved forward, if the legislative text looks good, if you have co-sponsors, that type of stuff. Pre-coronavirus, I was the person who went down to the floor with my boss. So I was the staffer, like sitting over a member's shoulder, furiously scurrying notes, keeping track of everything that other members asked her about and, wanted responses on, so that we could make sure that the committee was getting information to all of our different offices. So day to day, it kind of just shifts based on what exactly is the crisis of the moment. But a lot of writing, a lot of reading is generally the gist.
Well, I guess Middlebury prepares you for something in that regard. It's really interesting to kind of hear about how these different hats you wear, whether that's doing lots of research or answering question lines, or it's this little more political aspect in a sense of dealing with congressmen and their congresspersons and their bills and stuff like that. So that's super interesting. So Kelly, like you mentioned in your biography, you've spent time both working for this House Oversight Committee, but also as a staffer for a couple different congresspeople now. What are the big differences between working in those 2 different positions still on Capitol Hill?
So in a personal office, when you are a legislative aide, you handle a ridiculous amount of issues, right? Each member has issues that they are leaders on, and that those are, where you dedicate a lot of your time as an LA. That said, you are having to monitor what's going on constantly for a lot of different stuff. So a lot of your day is spent in that way. Whereas on the Oversight Committee, my focus is much more specialized on our investigations and health policy as a whole. So I think that's one difference. On the other hand, for the member services side, I have to pay a lot of attention to our caucus as a whole, rather than just what Congresswoman Maloney's doing. I have to be paying attention to what other bills members have put forward, what might be moving on the floor that week that we have some say in, or, that we're getting questions about, that type of thing. So I have to have a more macro level awareness of the other members of Congress, of what's going on, on our floor and that type of thing.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you have to be a little bit more of a team player in a sense, when you're working on this committee. So we've referenced it a couple times as working for the Democratic caucus or working for Democratic congresspeople. What is your relationship like with staffers from across the aisle? Those of us on Twitter will, see the spats between senators and congresspeople, I'm sure exchanging jabs, but obviously you have to work with a lot of these people day in and day out. And so what is your relationship with them like? And is it any different because of your position on the Oversight Committee?
I would say we work across the aisle a lot, particularly because my boss is always very interested in doing so. The two bills I passed for her back in my stead as an LA were both bills that were co-led with Republican Congress people, which were, is why we were able to pass those bills. So it's definitely one of those things where you do work across the aisle. I would say with the committee, sometimes it's a little more tense. I mean, we are the Oversight Committee in particular. It kind of differs across committees and who's, what members sit on them and what issues we cover, the different levels of collegiality there. That said, our staffs are very communicative. We contact them and say, like, okay, what's your position on this bill? How do you guys feel about this? What are you thinking here? Like, we do have those conversations frequently. That said, being in the majority, you're like, okay, so we're doing this. So sometimes that's the call. So I think it just differs a little bit, particularly on the topic, right? So the committee earlier this year took a look at facial recognition and the government's use of facial recognition programs. And we had some hearings on that. That's something that both parties were really interested in. Both parties wanted to dig deep into. And so we had a set of hearings and tried to listen to experts on where, how do we as a government move forward with facial recognition policies and making sure that they're used in a responsible way. So there are definitely issues that we do work together on. That said, Oversight, also help work on the impeachment stuff. We helped work, we have some that we're not finding common ground on. So it kind of differs.
Oh, that's interesting. The more contentious nature versus not of some of these issues. So I guess, as we mentioned in the biography and as you've kind of pointed out, so your career path has been pretty varied and you're still young, you've only graduated just a few years ago. What are some aspects of either working at those newspapers or on a political campaign or time at Middlebury that have, helped you succeed at your job or helped you land this job? What have your past experiences done for you working now?
I would say at Middlebury, learning how to think critically about different policies and think from different perspectives about those policies has been really useful, right? So when we are trying to do something, we always want to make sure we're covering the whole issue, thinking about how it impacts different constituencies, how it impacts different parts of the country, those type of things, right? Who's the most impacted? How are they impacted? I think those thought processes are stuff that came from my liberal arts education, right? Especially, and just the memo writing, the deep research. We'll put out 20-page memos that have like a very deeply researched background. So that's definitely something I got from college. I think working on the campaign was really meaningful to me. The reason I decided to stick around in DC is I spent hours and hours every day with volunteers who had decided to spend their free time working for the Democratic Party. And so you spend a lot of time talking to them about why they find politics important, why they find, this volunteer time important to them. And you hear from them about how much of this is a life or death issue, right? Whether or not somebody gets health care, whether or not somebody's able to put food on the table that night, you hear those stories. And so that's why I was interested in going onto the Hill. And why I'm, really love working in politics is I think sometimes people think it's this lofty thing that's set aside from real life. And working on a campaign really hammered home for me that it is, woven into people's everyday decisions. It's not something that you can separate from day-to-day life in any way. And so I think that was something really meaningful to me. And then working on newspapers was able to just kind of dive into different local communities and try to see things from a perspective completely outside of my own, which I think is always a valuable experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really great to hear, one, that of course, the liberal arts education is paying off for you now, but also some of the reason students like myself, and I'm sure other political science majors or minors, is, interested in really helping out the people we see as neighbors or we work with as volunteers as political campaigns. So it's good to hear that, all the hard work you're doing and, is really going somewhere actually positive. So this might be a little bit of a tougher question, but I felt like I had to ask it. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And how has your time working on Capitol Hill, like you said, it's, influenced you, the campaign did, and now working on Capitol Hill, how has that kind of changed thinking about your future steps and as you progress down your career path?
Yeah, that is a difficult question. um, 5 years from now, I personally, right now, I feel like I'm learning a lot every day. I've only, been on the Hill for a couple years. And so I think I am very happy to stay where I am and keep learning from, a lot of the staff that I work with have worked on the Oversight Committee for, the tenure of numerous chairmen. And they have just a lot of really important institutional knowledge. So I think definitely continuing to learn from them. Politics is a little weird because every 2 years, the House may shift. And the way it works with committees is, so personal offices, you're really tied to whether or not your boss wins re-election, right? And every 2 years, your boss is up for a re-elect. The committee is really tied to which party has the majority. Because right now we have around 100 staff, but if we lose and get moved into the minority, they cut our staff by a lot.
Oh, wow.
And we have to switch, you switch offices, you switch, which side of the hearing room we get to enter, everything like that. So a lot of it is definitely tied to those 2-year cycles, which I think is something that you have to be ready for if you're interested in working in politics. It is very anxiety provoking very often. Thankfully, I'm prohibited from working in a lot of the campaign capacities, and I don't really do that, but you obviously pay attention and you follow along.
Sure.
So I think part of it is, hoping that we continue to have the majority, because it's a lot more fun than being in the minority, but, and continuing to work along those lines. And I think one of the things I've learned from working on the Hill is that there are these, there are big names that you think of when you think of Capitol Hill and the people that, populate it. But there's tens of thousands of people working behind the scenes. And a lot of those people are doing really incredible, impressive things. And so I think just, using this opportunity for myself to learn more from those behind the scenes people, I think is really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I might have been a tough question, but I thought that was a really good answer. And it's really interesting to hear that, there's people that have been working on the Oversight Committee for a long time and all the, the things still left to learn, I guess. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so finally, maybe the question all the students are waiting for, do you have any advice for Middlebury students like myself that would like to intern or work on Capitol Hill, especially in the time of COVID, because I'm sure that's changed a lot. And secondly, how is it different applying to work in a member's office versus a committee?
Okay. So I would say the first thing, looking for internships, looking for jobs on the Hill, is really know what issues you're passionate about and find out who's leading on them. At the same time, I think being open to, basically anything is always a good thing when you're looking for a job. And I will say I went onto the Hill. I studied history, studied South Asian history really heavily at Mid. Thought I was going to go into foreign affairs, thought that was going to be my path. Not at all. No interest in it now. Got super interested into healthcare stuff, was willing to dive into that. So I think, know what you're passionate about, but be flexible is kind of my overarching advice. In terms of the nitty gritty, members, personal offices like to staff up with people from their district, right? So always first look to your members. I got lucky so I grew up in a red state with no Democratic members of Congress whatsoever. So I didn't have a home rep to go to. And I got lucky that Congressman Pallone took pity on me as a fellow mid-grad and helped me out, which was great. We chatted about Middlebury sometimes, which was always really weird, but great. And so also look to those, right? We have a few members, I think 2 members from Middlebury. Use any of those connections that you have to a different place, to, whatever a member's interested in, and try to make sure you make that clear. And reach out to, the people who have done these interviews, reach out to myself. And I, speaking for myself, always willing to try to flag a resume if I can find somebody in the office that I know, that type of thing. Coronavirus has at least made it so we have interns working remotely, which I think makes it a little bit easier, right? You don't have to try to move down to DC for a summer, first semester, or something like that. So there are more opportunities there. The committee is a little weird because it's a little more specialized. A lot of the interns on our policy side or on our investigative teams are in law school. That said, we do have interns that are undergrads, so it's kind of just depends on where you'll be placed is, I guess, the difference. But same kind of application process where we have like open application period and, people try to get in. And for getting staffed on the two, it's kind of a similar. Committees generally have a little bit more specialized focus, right? So rather than, being from an area and knowing the politics of that area and knowing the constituency, which is really big at a personal office, is like knowing so-and-so's district, knowing what they care about, that type of thing is always really great when you're in a personal office. Committee offices, people tend to have more background in the subject matter, and being more of a subject matter expert. So I think those are the kind of two differences. That said, again, hire from all over the place. So it's very,
Yeah.
And I think the one odd overarching rule of the Hill is that every office is its own fiefdom with its own member, and they can set a lot of their own rules. And so sometimes, so what is true of one office is not necessarily true of any other. And so learning, how that works is interesting. And then I would say the other thing for internships that I think is really important, I guess two things, is to pay attention to what offices are paying interns, right? This is the first Congress where every office has been given money to pay their interns. So everybody should be doing that, at least to some extent. And there are also organizations who will help place you in an internship, so you wouldn't be applying directly to the office. The two I'm most familiar with are the Congressional Black Caucus Institute and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. With those, you apply to the institute, and the institute helps you get on the Hill. And then there's also all these other professional networking opportunities that come from being affiliated with those. So looking at those kind of off the Hill orgs or affiliated with the Hill orgs, right? The Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus run those two institutes. But just knowing those semi-affiliated orgs and, ones that may fit for you, I think that's also a great avenue to get on the Hill.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, there's a lot in there, but really good kind of those little tips about each fiefdom and these off-Hill orgs and stuff. That was a really, really good answer, and it's always nice to hear we can count on those mid connections every once in a while as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for taking a little time today to share your expertise in getting on Capitol Hill and the House Oversight Committee. And thank you to everyone watching and joining with us today. We hope you learned something, and join us next week for the final episode with a Middlebury grad, Congressman Sean Casten from the class of 1993. Kelly, thank you once again so much for taking a little bit of time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye.